Hi guys, it's Weedit, and I am back with 5 tips to try to reduce waste when you're working with acrylic pours. Now the first one is to measure your paint carefully so that you don't mix up too much paint for what you're using. I know that one of these cups will pretty much cover a 4x4 canvas. Now, how do you get started if you haven't done pours and you're trying to figure out how much paint to use? One of the things to do is to experiment with low-cost paints. Craft paints, they won't flow exactly the same, but it will be fairly close until you figure out just exactly how much paint you need to cover a certain size substrate. So the first one is to measure your paint carefully so that you don't mix up too much. And hidden in there was also try experimenting with less non-artist grade materials. DIY pouring medium and craft paints are a lot of fun. So tip number 1, measure your paint carefully. Okay. Tip number 2 would be to have mop-up cards handy, or tags in this case. Have some pieces of paper that you can dip into the wet paint that's poured off of your canvas and into whatever you're using to catch the paint. And that's where this tag came from. And I have found that these, what I call mop-up cards, are awesome later because you already have your background and a neat, intricate, interesting background worked out already. So tip number 2, mop-up cards. That way you're not wasting the paint that comes off of the canvas, even because some of it will drip off. The third one is to work wet in wet. Now I really like this one because it helps the paint move once you pour it on the canvas, and it will lead to more likelihood of getting some negative space. Now, working wet in wet means that you paint your canvas in, say, a neutral, white or black, whatever's going to coordinate with your pour. And you do that just before you pour. So your canvas is wet, and then you pour the paint on top of it, and that will help your paint move and spread out. And if you have just a little less than you need, it's no problem because your canvas is already painted. So you don't have to worry about, okay, I've got to mix enough to get it, covered, and no, paint it first, pour into the wet paint. The paint will move differently. That's another fun thing to do. And you can get by with a little bit less paint in your pour. Now, the next tip is simply to recycle your substrates. Okay, these are pours I did that I didn't like, so I have gessoed over them, and I will reuse these substrates. Also, a couple substrates, and this kind of leads into the next tip, and that's to, when you're thinking of recycled substrates, think about substrates that the acrylic paint will peel off of. So you can reuse your substrate. This is Yupo paper, and I did a pour on it. I'll go into that in just a minute, but it wasn't what I wanted. It was my fault, and I didn't like it, so I peeled it off the Yupo, and I now can reuse this piece of Yupo. Then glass is another thing. I did this piece, and there was another thing on here. I had to work really hard to get the paint off, but this is glass. I like to do pours on glass. After having had this one out for a while, I decided I wanted to reuse the glass, so I peeled the paint off. And that leads me to the last tip, which is if you use substrates that you can peel the acrylic paint off of, when you get a pour that you don't like or that you don't want, you then have an acrylic skin. I'm going to back out Okay, now this one was rather hard to get off of the glass, but this makes a beautiful acrylic skin with, and the camera's not picking it up, but there's some beautiful great depth right in here, and then I love the movement around here, and I like this. So I've now have, the back is kind of bland, but still could be used depending on what I wanted to do with it. So I can still, I mean, I had it, it was on display for a little while, and then I thought, I want to do something different, and now I've got a really cool acrylic skin. Same thing, this is the pour that was on Yupo, and it's odd. I had actually planned on doing a pour with graduated colors coming down, so it was a pour with an ombre effect, and the problem is when I was getting my paint together and mixing it up, I was also thinking, I could do a landscape. So what I ended up with were, I hadn't really worked out the details of the landscape, but I pulled landscape colors and mixed them up, and so I had them mixed up, and I looked down and it's like, oh wow, that's so not what I planned on doing. I was going to do this ombre, and yet I mixed up earth color paints. So I said, well, this isn't exactly what I wanted, but let me do the pour anyway. And so I ended up with this. And I kept it for a while thinking, this isn't quite how I wanted my landscape to look. Can I still do anything with this and paint on top of it? I decided no, and I didn't want to do that. So I peeled it off the Yupo, and now I have a great acrylic skin to play with. So, and it turned out really cool up here. I really love that. So, and it's really neat. It's got some really cool areas in it, but it wasn't what I envisioned. So that's the bad thing about planning to do one thing and your brain kind of interfering. So those are my 5 tips for trying to reduce the waste you might have with acrylic pours. And again, it's to measure your paint carefully so you use just what you need. Experiment with inexpensive materials to figure that out, how much you need. Have mop-up cards handy, and to work wet in wet. Okay, that means 1, you can use less paint, and 2, you're more likely to get some negative space in some other areas. And then 3, you can, or maybe this is 4, I think this is 4, recycle your substrates. Of course, artists have been doing that for years, recycling their canvases, but if you can use Yupo or glass, then it's even easier to recycle your substrates. You can peel the paint off, and that gets you the bonus of you can have acrylic skins then to do something with. So these things really help reduce waste and can lead you to having more toys to play with, toys being more goodies like acrylic skins and backgrounds already done to play with in your studio. So if you have any comments or other suggestions on ways to reduce waste in acrylic pours, let me know. Leave them in the comments below. Thank you for being here. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button, and I will see you next time. Bye!